Good evening and a warm welcome to each one of you who has joined us this evening. This is the seventh online session of ADHOC RC1. I'm Leena, convener of the RC. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, here's a little bit about our research committee. ADHOC RC1 is on pedagogy, teaching, and learning, and this was formed last year. In fact, we just completed a year and a little more. This RC aims to provide an enabling space to listen to and have conversations around theoretical and empirical work, methods and methodologies, teaching practices, and reflections related to the broader fields of teaching and learning sociology. We focus a lot on the classroom and how it can be a site of immense possibilities as well as challenges, but we also move beyond the classroom to other sites of learning. We like to interrogate, revisit, reimagine, and have conversations across disciplines. To the large number of participants who have joined us, to all those, in fact, who have joined us today, and we are expecting many more to join, we would, in fact, invite you to join our RC and be a part of the deliberations. We especially invite young research scholars and students to participate in the RC deliberations. So please do follow the social media handles of ISS to stay updated on upcoming events of ADHOC RC1. In the past year, we've had a number of sessions centered around classroom pedagogies, sociological imagination, autoethnography, research, and we also did a session on family studies today, reflections on pedagogy, and Professor Nilika did it was part of the panel along with others. And we did this in collaboration with the research committee on family, marriage, and kinship. Then we had a book discussion on reflexivity, relatedness, and interpretations, the curved trajectory of social research. We also had a students panel on the weekly rural newsletter, a panel comprising students from Flame University who had joined along with their mentor, Shamsher Singh. We've had Dr. Geeta Chadda, who in fact did the first session in the RC. We've had Rukmini Sen, who did the second session on sociological imagination. Then we had Anurekha, who did a lovely session on autoethnography as a feminist pedagogical tool. So thankful to each one of them. Today we have a much awaited panel discussion on a theme that is very pertinent. Conversations about marginalization in education generally focus on caste, class, gender, sexuality. But a discussion on disability remains largely in the background. And when I say this, I'm referring especially to invisible disabilities. Standardized institutional practices of teaching and learning and assessment assume a one size fits all learner, usually imagined as a cis het able-bodied neurotypical student. Very often we are not equipped with the knowledge, training, and tools to meaningfully engage such students. And I think this is not just about students. I think we need to implicate each one of us. So, for example, someone from the non-teaching staff, for example, we have people who live with visible and invisible disabilities or even as pedagogues. Now, how do we then imagine or rather reimagine classrooms and campuses that support all constituencies on campus? I mean, this session seeks to engage with disability affirming pedagogies, approaches that center access, flexibility, and care in teaching and learning for everybody on campus. We have a lovely panel, and I can't thank them enough for agreeing to do this. And let me introduce them before I invite the chair to proceed with the session. So, our chair for this session is Professor Nilika Mehrotra. Nilika is a social anthropologist teaching at the Center for the Study of Social Systems at Jawaharlal Nehru University. She has been a Fulbright senior researcher at the University of California. She has authored the book Disability, Gender, and State Policy, Exploring Margins, and edited Disability Studies in India, Interdisciplinary Perspectives, which is a Springer 2020 publication. Besides, of course, numerous research articles in the areas of women's movement, gender disability, and development studies. Our panelists include Professor Shubhangi Vaidya. Shubhangi is with the School of Interdisciplinary and Trans-disciplinary Studies at the Indira Gandhi National Open University. She's a sociologist by training with research interest in disability studies and gender studies. She is the author of Autism and the Family in Urban India, Looking Back, Looking Forward, and Embodying Motherhood Perspectives from Contemporary India, which she co authored with Anu Anija. We have Nandini Ghosh, who's a faculty member at the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. She has published widely on issues around gender, disability, law, and politics in well-known peer-reviewed journals. Some of those include a monograph, Impaired Bodies, Gendered Lives, Everyday Realities of Disabled Women, and co-authored a book on domestic violence titled The Violent Domestic Law, Its Practice and Strategies of Survival. She has edited a volume titled Interrogating Disability in India, Theory and Practice, and has co-edited two books, Pratyaha Everyday, Dilemmas, Contestations and Negotiations. Pratyaha Everyday Life Worlds, Dilemmas, Contestations and Negotiations, and Caste and Gender in Contemporary India, Power, Privilege and Politics. We have Tony. Tony is an economic sociologist, a Nehru Fulbright doctoral fellow at the Department of Economics, University of Massachusetts. Tony employs sociological tools to understand the functioning of markets. At the core of his research lies the central inquiry into the political nature of market design choices and their consequential impact on market outcomes. How does a market interact with existing social structure? How do market design choices, which may appear rational on the surface, conceal their political nature? He answers these questions by unraveling the inner workings of markets, thereby demonstrating the social and political forces that constitute market engineering. When not thinking about market designs, he's ruminating about ways to use his research skills for furthering the cause of the disability rights movement. He is also an early career visiting fellow with New Political Economy Initiative at IIT Mumbai. I'm delighted to have you all, and I welcome you all to this session. May I now invite Nilika to proceed with the session.
Thank you, Leena. I think this is such an important initiative that your research committee has taken, and something which I have been thinking about for some time, but I have not been able to do it. Today, as a chair of this really, important session, I'm going to just, begin with very briefly with, my foray into disability studies at JNU in last 2 decades or so. And towards the end of the session, I'll just try to wind up and see from where to where we have reached. So this is about, around 2000 when I joined JNU after teaching for a few years in University of Delhi. I recall that there was a student who was deaf and speech impaired, and this, for the first time, it struck me that I had no tools to respond to him. So this was like it was a very difficult situation that I found myself in. There was another student who was blind, and she asked me if she could record my lectures. And this was also a request which was very new to me, because nobody had before that, asked me to record the lectures. And as you know, um, recording lectures always, any kind of recording creates some kind of difficulty. But then I realized that, she needed to record my lecture in order to, because she was not able to write. So this was, I think, my encounter with persons with disabilities and my inability to actually uh, deal with or respond to the queries that they had. With the first student, I was teaching a course on techniques of field research, and when I asked him, I wanted him to, choose some alternative way, because I had set my students out for small field visits. But he insisted that he wanted to go for the field work. And he rather told me that, if others are using translators, especially those who came from South India and who did not know Hindi, he wanted to use a translator. And this was like, this was a revelation to me, that this student really had thought about, and he was giving me a learning. So I think this was why I'm giving you these two examples, that, as a teacher who had been in the academics for a long time, was not really prepared for responding to the needs of students with disabilities. And the students themselves were teaching me how, I would respond to their concerns. This was also the time when disability studies had just kind of begun in terms of, discussions, etc. And I remember in 2004 or so, Anita Ghai, late Anita Ghai, who we lost so tragically so early, she had organized a workshop on developing a course curriculum on disability studies. And she was teaching in JMC then, Jesus and Mary College at University of Delhi. But, she wanted to develop a course on disability studies. So she had actually collected a few people, and I was one of them, because I had already by that time done some research. And so this was also the time when I saw people who were interested in disability studies were coming together. There were very few of us. Nevertheless, I think everybody was very excited and very curious about, also enthusiastic about developing, tools, and reflecting on our pedagogies, and what to be really, taken to the students. Um, and this was the time when Shubhangi came to me, I think around 2005 or 6. I don't remember when she came. But, this Shubhangi's work with me as a PhD student opened so much for me, because this was the time, like, when I was thinking of several things, and working with her uh, was a way that, which I had not anticipated. And this was also like, not only Shubhangi, but then this was the time when disability studies was kind of, taking germs into university structure, JNU itself, as well as DU. And in DU, Dr. Professor Tanmay Bhattacharya, he and Anita Ghai came together, and they started a discussion platform, and they invited students to actually talk about their experiences, and also engage with the text, the core text that disability studies in the US and UK had produced. But in my case, it was more about students. Students were gravitating to me, those who wanted to do research on disability studies. And I found myself as a person who did not really know much about disability studies or all kinds of disabilities, my research was very limited. Nevertheless, this kind of opened things for me. And I also started participating in conferences, and organized a conference in 2011 in JNU, then 2015 in JNU. So these were the ways uh, through which we were bringing the scholars together, students together, who found some kind of space to actually talk about disability issues. So these issues were not only about their research, these issues were about pedagogies, about course curriculum, about the way they were kind of treated in the university structures. I'll give you an example of one of my student who is now with civil services. She was a blind student, Pragya, and she wrote a long note to me, which she was sending to the vice chancellor then. And this note was about what were their requirements. And I must say that I could only relate to few, but she had such a long list of requirements. And one of the things that I felt, that she was not openly saying, but I think she was complaining that teachers were not they were not apathetic, but they were not trained enough to respond to their concerns. So most of the teachers, like since she was blind, she would talk about how if a teacher was presenting PowerPoint, and he or she would assume that the students are able to see the PowerPoint, instead of talking about those issues. Then there was another student who came and told me that she was dyslexic and she wanted accommodation in terms of because she was not able to read a text, say 10 pages text, even in a week's time. So she was a very slow learner, but she was very open about how she was she wanted accommodation, and she wanted 1 hour extra for her exam. So I think the experiences of students with disabilities actually made me learn so much about how we were to act in educational institutions. The other thing that I have been kind of doing in my since we don't have a course on disability studies, given the kind of heavy workload that all of us work with, that in each course, if I could introduce disability perspective, for instance, teaching Levi Strauss, for instance, and his study of myth, and and like it never occurred to me earlier that the binaries that he was talking about, especially when he talks about autochthonous or non-autochthonous status of the human existence, he uses Laois, who was the father of Oedipus, and he was lame. And Oedipus himself had a swollen foot. And I was like, it is only by being in disability studies that I realize the importance of, the way disability was consistently used as metaphors in our theoretical text. But we did not pay so much attention to that. And of course, one of the students who wrote a dissertation on normal and pathological in Durkheim's work, as well as later works which followed Durkheim, how normality and pathology could be understood through disability studies perspective. The other very important thing, which one of the students actually who was also blind, I learned from him, was about methodology. I was teaching a course on methods, and I was teaching about doing field work. And here, uh, the student said that, can the blind um, people do ethnography? And it set me thinking. This was like, and I asked about, why there is so much of focus in sociology on seeing but not using other kind of senses. Today we are talking about sensory ethnography also. So touch is important, hearing is important, and but eyes are given so much of importance in observation, because observation is one of our key tools. So I think, what I'm trying to just say, that there are several numerous examples which actually students made me think and rethink, in terms of, how we, when we talk about observation, we only talk about sighted people, or how we, when we talk about sound, we only talk about people who can hear. And so, there are several of these things that, senses and sensory experiences that are so very central to the project of ethnography. And on the other hand, in courses like family and kinship, by introducing, studies like, when I had started off, there were very few studies in actually Indian context. So in family and kinship studies also, I could find hardly, any text. But over time, I have realized that, by including references on disability and related aspects like family, kinship, marriage. Marriage is one very popular subject among the students. Sexuality is another one. So some of these readings actually made the whole class discuss these issues. So, which wouldn't happen if we were to have a separate course on disability and society, because I also teach gender, and I know that, it has taken such a long time for gender to become one of the key tools in social analysis. So if disability perspective has to be one of the key, organizing principles, say in a course like social stratification. One of my colleague who was teaching social stratification, she came to discuss her course, and I said, why disability is missing here? You have caste, class, race, ethnicity, but you don't have disability. So she introduced, readings on disability. Similarly, in courses like social movements, if you don't have a course, if you don't have a course reading on disability rights movements or disability organizations, because civil society organizations who work on disability rights actually are very important, and there is a lot of work which is happening. Vandana's work, and so you have Nandini's work is there. So you have work available in the Indian context itself, because I also realized that, students relate more to Indian examples, and very less to European and American examples. So my effort has also been to see to it that how do we decolonize this whole concept of disability, and introduce more and more readings from the Indian scholars, so that, students who are studying in higher education settings are able to connect to that. So this is in brief about, my journey, and I'm very very happy to chair this session. I'll be coming in the end for 2 minutes to wrap up the session. So may I now invite the speaker? So I can start with Dr. Nandini Ghosh, if it's fine with you, Leena. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely, Nilika, that's your prerogative as a chair.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leena, to the RC, and Nilika. I think it was one of one is the fact that this RC is discussing a topic like this makes it very important, because disability, as we keep arguing, is always very marginalized. To discuss disability pedagogy in a RC session is very, very important to us as disability studies scholars. Thank you, Nilika, for putting the frame so well, because I will take off from where I think you stopped. I will start by discussing a little bit about how do we look at inclusion? How do we view inclusion? Because we use the term very easily nowadays. We have all these DEIs that we keep, the short forms that we keep circulating. But how do we understand inclusion? So when we think about inclusion, I think the when we talk about DEI, diversity, education, and inclusion, I think that is very important when we talk about diversity. And India, as a society, as a country, has been very diverse. From the constitution itself, there has been a recognition of diversity, but disability has not been part of the diverse framework that was presented in the constitution. So there is Corn and Murphy who discussed in 2023. They talked about inclusion, which they see is a result of a process of people coming to know one another, accepting the other as they are, and adjusting to people's different ways of being in the world. Now, this is a very, I think I thought it was a very broad way of looking at it, not just in education, but when we put it in the frame of education, we look at schools and campuses and we see a lot of very diverse people coming in. And how do we accept? How do we ensure that there is acceptance of these diverse groups of people within the same space? And how do we adjust to different ways of doing things? Now, in school, and this is what is important, I think, in school, we are molding people. So, when we have young children in schools, we are teaching them, we should be teaching them about accepting diversity. But I'm not sure what happens. And also because disabled children are not part of every classroom. So other students do not have exposure to disabled people. And that is why, when people come to a higher education campus, that is where I think there is the first exposure to persons with disabilities, even at the stage of being a student, or at the level of being a faculty member, or at the level of administration. So in higher education, this is very important, because even by law, and the first law that we had was the 1995 law, which was about equal opportunity, full participation, and protection of rights. And that law very clearly mentioned about inclusive schooling. But it only put a 3% reservation for students with disability in higher education, assuming that by the time a student passes through school and reaches higher education, the student would have learned how to adjust to the larger education scenario. So there was hardly any discussion about how campuses can become inclusive. Rather, it was about how the student can adjust to the larger higher education campus. So when we talk about inclusion, we are talking really about ethics and care. And in higher education, this becomes very important, because when students come to colleges or campuses, there is an assumption of adulthood. And the assumption of adulthood poses unique challenges in terms of access, because we are living in an unequal society like India, and disability becomes one more marker by which this inequality is played out. So if we are looking at inclusion as such on higher education campuses, we have to look at how values and knowledge shape and justify the pedagogies for students with disabilities. And we therefore would like to have pedagogies that will address inclusion on campus and inclusion within the classroom. Now, as I mentioned, by law, there is nothing in terms of pedagogy in any of the laws that have come for persons with disability, nor is there anything on the Right to Education Act of 2009. What these acts just talk about is a token inclusion within classrooms of children with disability, and primarily this is talking about school education and not much about higher education. So when you come to higher education, there is the stumbling block that we face. And what is the stumbling block? Because one is the diversity of disability itself. Like when Nilika was giving the examples, and I was thinking that there are no two students who require the same solution. So for every student, the solutions have to be crafted differently. The pedagogies, therefore, will need to respond differently to the diverse needs of the disabled learners. And that is where we sometimes get struck, because we are always looking at a one size fits all kind of a framework. So that is where the diversity of disability itself, but also the diversity at the level of the subject choices that the students make. And here also, depending on the subject that the student takes, the pedagogies also need to vary. Literature will require a different approach than when you are teaching social sciences. And it will be even more different when you are teaching, say, natural sciences. And we can hope to see at least a diversity of students in all these kind of disciplines, and not just a concentration in the arts and humanities. So that is where we need to talk about how higher education can respond to the needs of diverse learners, specifically students with disabilities. Now, what happens at the school level, and we have the Right to Education Act, we have the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016, we have in between all the Samagra Shiksha Mission and its precursors, which are talking about school education. And school education from the beginning has a thrust on inclusion, which is also kind of exclusive. So in principle, children are included in schools, but there has been a thrust in the last few years of homeschooling. And the homeschooling depends primarily on parental training. So what you're in essence doing is you're telling the students that yes, education is a right for you, but you need not come to the school to study. You sit at home. Once in a while, we'll send a teacher, and then we will, of course, we are within that very gracious charity model. We will give you concessions so that you reach at least up to a certain level of education. So it is a very big struggle to get disabled students into higher education, and that is a struggle they face also when they come to campuses which are suddenly very huge, which are very, very diverse, and they themselves may not have the coping skills to adjust to this kind of a scenario. So what will happen in that kind of a scenario? So as part of the pedagogy here, I think one of the things that is very, very important is to, address the needs of the disabled learners from an administrative point of view. How are the administrative people responding to a person with disability, a student with disability who comes comes for admission, how will they, inculcate the student into the campus value system? How will they prepare the larger campus for welcoming this student with disability, keeping in mind the diverse needs of these people? Now, the other thing that is very, very important, and I think needs to be addressed, is how do we get the student community to respond to such diverse learners? And I will talk about two campuses that I am quite associated with in Kolkata. One is the Calcutta University campus, and the other is the Jadavpur University campus. And the setup is starkly different. Jadavpur University has only one campus, I mean, it has a side campus now, but there is a main campus in Jadavpur. And there they have the students' union that does address some of the needs of these disabled students. They have a disabled students' hostel. So if a disabled student is coming in from the districts, they are sure to get a hostel. And there is a Disabled Students Association that takes new students under its wings, takes them around the campus, orients them about what is there, and also introduces them to the larger student community. Calcutta University has 5 different campuses. The problem is, because it is not a centralized campus, therefore, the students with disabilities are left mostly to themselves. They may get friends who will come with them, or a relative who will come with them, and they will try to adjust to this larger setup. Not to say that in Jadavpur, disabled students do not have to adjust, but the adjustment is made easier by the fact that there is a student community, and also by the fact that there is a larger sensitivity towards disabled students. The other thing I would like to point out, and I think Nilika's examples really also brought to my mind, in one of the social science departments in Jadavpur University, I was very surprised to see, let me tell you, I was really surprised to see a young woman with Down syndrome in the classroom. And she asked a few questions, and I was really happy to see her interact in the classroom. And I did find out about her, and I have learned that she is a very regular student. She brings her mother, she's taken permission for her mother to come with her and take notes in the classroom. So this is a pedagogical innovation in a certain way, where we have seen blind people come with writers. We have seen deaf people using, nowadays with technology coming in, the voice to text technology is being used. But this was a very good innovation, to have her mother in the classroom taking notes, making her feel comfortable. And when she comes to give her exams, she writes by herself. She doesn't write very well. Sometimes she has to give supplementary exams, but the system caters to her. The system has not pushed her out, but rather has made way to make her feel welcome in the classroom, to make her feel included within the education system. So for me, this is also a pedagogical practice. It's not just in the curriculum, it is not just in the way that we do classroom teaching, but it is also in these small changes that we make to ensure inclusion of disabled people. Now, two other things that I would like to point out here is the question of curriculum, and how curriculum, or the rolling out of curriculum, must respond to the needs of these diverse learners with disabilities. Because again, going back to Nilika's example, using a PPT is something that we do very much nowadays. Do we provide a description of what is on the PPT? For deaf students, do we use language that is easily accessible? Or and as Leena talked about invisible disabilities, are we actually catering to the needs of the persons with invisible disabilities? Are we ensuring, say, soundproof systems for students with autism who might be in our classrooms? We have not actually, I think, gone to that level. We are still with the visible disabilities and still trying to cope with these visible disabilities. There may be some cases of inclusion of the invisible disabilities, but it is not a systemic inclusion. It is an inclusion by chance. So that is where I think the question of power that comes in, and also I think the modes of evaluation. And this is a discussion that we were having today in my institute also, that we have a standard mode of evaluation where we have an exam system, or we have, when people are handing in, say, assignments, it's a different thing. But when it is a structured exam that people have to give in a particular time frame, I think that might be very difficult for some persons with disabilities to cope with? Are we devising alternate systems of evaluation for these students where they can perform equally well but may not perform as well in an exam? But we have still haven't thought out about the modes of evaluation. We are still thinking only about classroom inclusion, but not really about the curriculum inclusion or the inclusion at the level of evaluation. And this is the last point which I want to highlight before I end. The question of power. Have we given these students with disabilities the ability to call out oppressive practices? Are we enabling them once they come into campus also? Are we enabling them to call out these oppressive practices that devalue and marginalize them on campus in different ways? And these could be other students who devalue them. It could be faculty members or the administrative staff. So I think we need to discuss a lot more on how inclusive provisions would look like, and maybe evolve a system of sharing knowledge about what is happening on campuses and build a repository of good practices of inclusion, good pedagogies that promote inclusion, and then we can use it across campuses. I will stop now, and maybe if there are questions later, I'll talk about it.
Thank you, Nandini, for flagging out such important issues. And to your last point, I must add that there has been a very strong disability activism, at least in the campus of JNU, and which actually made it possible to have a number of facilities that students with disabilities are able to have, and they air their grievances at different forums. So I think that has to spread, that has to but there are now social media networks also between students of different universities, and they are inspiring each other to take up these issues. Yeah, so now I think I'll move on to Dr. Tony Kurian and for his intervention. Are you there, Tony?
I did see him.
If he like, you can check for him.
Hello.
In the
yeah, he's there. Yes.
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Sorry, I some problem
Yes.
with the microphone. Sorry. Thank you. So thank you for this opportunity, and in the sense that
Can
it-
I
beyond,
just interrupt? Tony, you need to adjust your camera a little bit. Yes.
okay,
Yes.
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
fine.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
This is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
purposeful
Yes,
thing.
yes,
Right.
yes,
Thank you.
yes.
So thank you for this opportunity, in the sense that beyond the perfunctory ways of saying such things, this is something that genuinely gives happiness, in the sense that an RC is actually doing this. So it's genuinely a pleasure to be here, because it's often we, the persons with disability, are the ones who have to lead these kind of initiatives, and then we sort of tag others, and then that's how usually these conversations proceed. But it's quite nice to see that an initiative have come from the RC, and there are a lot of wonderful people taking up this up. And also, it's a great pleasure to be on this panel, in the sense that these are people from whom I learned a lot about disability and disability rights. In fact, what it means to be having an identity of someone with disability. You still think about disability movement, and Professor Nilika's, I believe, 2011 paper in EPW comes to your mind. So that kind of is what you learned from all these people, right? So diving into the business, and I think it's it's a very important topic, as we all agree. I just wanted to put forth 3 or 4 points, and I will try to be try to keep it short. The first thing I would like to say is that, so just to set the context, I'm visually blind. For those of you who are blind and is not watching the video, now the first point for me is to say that there is some kind of an instrumentality that is embedded in our thinking when we think about making inclusive pedagogies, especially from a social anthropology or a sociology sort of a lens. And the instrumentality is something like this. It says that, oh, we need to have more students with disability, and because, there is some need to produce a knowledge around disability, and that is a good reason for us to have some kind of an inclusive pedagogy. I believe one need to, while we definitely appreciate more students with disability and researchers with disability creating knowledge about disability, I believe that instrumentality is not the spectrum through which you look at an inclusive pedagogy. And inclusive pedagogy is good for in itself. Doesn't have to be any form of instrumentality attached to it, right? And that instrumentality many times comes across as microaggressions and all of that, right? Because the moment you ask for inclusive pedagogy, the expectation is that, oh, fine, you are here to produce knowledge about something that we, the able-bodied, would not be able to produce. So there's kind of a reciprocity in it, and therefore we could consider your request, right? So there is some kind of a microaggression sort of a thing that happens, and that instrumentality therefore needs to be challenged and questioned, and say that as learners, as researchers with disability, we are here. But inclusive pedagogies are not only about us. It's about everyone. It's how things should ideally look like. It's not because you would expect me to research on certain things that you think I am well positioned to, but that shouldn't be the case. So that's my first thing. My second point would be to say that it is very important for us as teachers, to think about inclusive pedagogies, to think about disability affirming pedagogies. But one also need to put this question of disability affirming pedagogy in the larger context, institutional context we are in. And by institution, I mean both the university as an institution, but also state as an institution. So I have been in different kind of institutional setups throughout my education, and this is my first sort of a teaching job, and it's a very different sort of spaces. All these are different kind of places. I should say that it's not because, as I think Professor Nilika was saying, I don't think it's because the professors are apathetic to the questions of students with disability that we find university spaces to be exclusionary in nature. My experience has been that it's primarily because the institutional rules, or as they call it, the rules of the game, are stacked against learners with disability. Correct. So there has been multiple examples of teachers from my school time to my university time, trying to do their own small bit to ensure some kind of disability affirming pedagogy, right? But that has a lot of limitations. What I have seen is that only when you have the institutional sort of alignment with the teacher as a pedagogue, right? That is when you kind of have that push. That's when you kind of can take this forward without much of an issue. Let me sort of make that a little more clear, right? So a lot of aspects of inclusive classrooms are really not things that a teacher can do by themselves. I mean, there are things that a teacher can do by themselves, but until you create the right incentive structure for a teacher to do it, a teacher would find it very hard to do, right? For example, something like a PowerPoint presentation or a slides, as we call it. Now, there are, to my mind, very few institutions in India which by default mandate that if you have a student with print disability on campus, print impairment in your class, it's mandated on you to send this slide beforehand to the student and write alt text in all images you use. This is something that a university can mandate. It doesn't take too much of a change of rule book for you to mandate it, but it has very few universities have some mandate of this kind. Secondly, very few universities, even till today, has something called as an Office of Inclusion or Office of Disability Affairs and things of this kind. What an Office of Inclusion would do is to support the teacher in creating a disability inclusive sort of a classroom, right? Because many of these things, and disability doesn't come in one size and size and shape. It comes in all kinds of sizes and shapes, and even two students with same disability would have different need. So it may not be, pragmatically speaking, possible for the teacher to reach all those needs until and unless the university has some kind of office of inclusion sort of a setup, right? So, for example, it is imperative that every student with disability should have some mechanism in all the universities to go and request for a what is called as a reasonable accommodation letter, right? The RA letter, as we call it, right? The moment this letter is sent to the teacher knows exactly what the student require as a student with disability. And this is extremely important when it comes to invisible disability, because many a times as faculty, as teachers, you see someone with a physical visible disability, you kind of make some assessment. Okay, this student might need X, Y, or Z. But when it comes to invisible disabilities, the structural mechanism through which you have a reasonable accommodation letter, and that letter comes to you with XYZ kind of requirement, and you can simply follow that, and then you can of course reach out to the disability office to see how they can support you in that, right? So while teachers should be are strongly encouraged to practice disability affirming pedagogy, I think it needs to be contextualized in the sense that two teachers with same aptitude in two different institutions might be coming out with two kinds of classrooms on the inclusion parameter, depending on which institutional context they are in, and that institutional context is very important. So how do you do this? How do you push an institution towards a disability-centric pedagogy as institution as a whole? And I think that's where what Professor Nandini left. The question of power comes to the center focus in that conversation. Um, in the sense that it's not often that you find persons with disabilities in the university systems in positions where you can call the shot, to say so. In most universities, even when you have teachers with disability, or even when you have, people in the administrative wings with disability, we are seen as, people who are here to tick the boxes, sort of a thing, right? Even in determining the fate of students with disability, there are no the opportunities are given to administrators and teachers with disability in the university systems are far and few, and that I think that's very important, and we need to be thinking very critically about it and understand that without you having persons with disability in positions of responsibilities, it could take way longer. It could take way long. Is there any disturb? Should I continue? Okay.
Please continue. It's fine. It's fine.
Right. So that's one. And the third thing I would like to say is a little bit about the curriculum and this is something that Professor Nilika pointed to, that the ocular centric nature of ethnography, and I'm assuming that a lot of our participants here would be interested in ethnography and social anthropology kind of a disciplinary location. The ocular centric nature of ethnography is something that is supremely ableist in its nature, right? So the wink and the twitch and the wink and the twitch from Geertz to everything you read in ethnography assumes somewhat an able-bodied individual, right? And it still resonates with the way you deliver ethnography as a methodology. It still continue in the way you imagine what it means to do an ethnography, and painfully it continues till today in the ways persons with disabilities are expected to do the research, right? I mean, if you send a journal piece, for example, without the quote unquote visual thick description, you are asked, why don't you have that, right? But we have double blind peer review. So how could I talk about my blindness in a double blind peer reviewed system, right? So the idea that one should think about ethnography and associated practices from a disability centric point of view is something that I think which warrants a lot more attention, and a lot more attention from individuals who are who have the ability to steer these conversations. And let me then conclude with the following thought. So when I entered this system of higher education, university, I should say that in the last 17 odd years, things have slightly started to look up, right? There are way more universities which recognize disability not as a lack of ability, but as, as a matter of diversity. There are way more universities today which has some kind of office of inclusion and disability and inclusion kind of a setup. In India, we have something called Inclusive Alliance Universities, something universities with inclusive alliance. I think that's what they're called. But there's some kind of things happening on that front. While I have not seen a lot of progress when it comes to de-ableizing things around ethnography, the fact that people like Professor Nilika and others have really pushed forward the concept of disability studies in Indian universities definitely has had positive repercussions. And I've felt it as a student and continue to feel it as a teacher. What is even more interesting is that a lot of inclusive pedagogical practices have come from places where we never expected it to come from. For example, one of the disciplines today that spends a lot of time in thinking about inclusive pedagogy happens to be computer science, com science, and com engineering. So you will find, at least when it comes to matters of visually blind individuals, you would find that there is a lot more thrust these days in thinking about all of this from a computer science sort of a perspective. And we did not think that this could be the place where, this could be the disciplinary location which would tell us a thing or two about how to go ahead with inclusive practice. So you would find that as today, the data sets that a sociologist would use would be more inaccessible than many of the programs that a typical computer engineering student would use. That's an interesting kind of a development. So what do I hope from these kind of conversations? And I think my bottom line of it is that one has to be honest in admitting the fact that, despite what sociology as a discipline would like to do to the world, in the world, we have lost a lot of opportunities, partly because of the structures we are in, but partly because of the inaction that we have taken, right? Partly because of our own inaction in that sense. So I genuinely believe these kind of conversations take us forward to challenging both the institutional structures, but also questioning our own, curriculums and pedagogical practices, but not get disappointed in that sense, because like I said, things have, if there has been any kind of movement, I believe it has been towards some bit amount of progress. And that's not to say that let's therefore go home, but to say that thankfully there has been more conversations of this kind, and more and interesting practices of this nature that is coming from some expected quarters, but at times unexpected quarters too. But thank you again.
Thank you very much, Tony, for underlining the institutional aspects which are extremely important. And I would also like to put in here that UGC, mandates very clearly that one is the establishment of disability studies programs in all the universities and higher education setting. But the second is also about how the institutions have to provide more accessible design, accessible structures. And though, some of us may not really like the way these ranking systems are working, but NAC and NIRF also have disability access as one of the very important parameters around which the structures have to get reshaped. The second thing is about, this is very true that engineering, I think computer engineering is one very important area. The other area is also again from the sciences, especially the way technology is being improved. The technology is, especially the examples from the IITs about how students are working on disabled friendly, technologies to provide for better access. So I think one can go on about the how different kind of technical professions are also contributing to the cause of disability studies. So we can of course have more questions around this. Now I would like to invite Professor Shubhangi Vaidya to make her intervention here.
Thank you so much to RC1. Thank you so much, Leena Pujari and team, for organizing this wonderful conversation and for giving me the opportunity to be a part of it. Thank you so much, Nilika ma'am, for the very, very wonderful way in which you framed this whole discussion. And on a personal note, I met you in 2004, not in 2006. So it's been over 20 years since I came to you with a tentative proposal, and the rest, of course, is the way we've kind of grown together in the profession. So I'd just like to begin by having made my thank yous. I'd also like to say that the last batsman, number 11, always has the very precarious position of not getting out very fast. But at the same time, if the team has batted fantastically, there's really not much left for number 11 to do, right? So I think so much of what I wanted to cover has already been covered by the speakers. So rather than repeating, the points made by them, I'll just add a few, just try to supplement the discussion. And my take will be through by flagging the idea of neurodiversity, or the concept of neurodiversity, which is in many ways a very new way of looking at disability, a very new term in the Indian context, at least, of trying to understand disability. But before that, I think it's very important, once again, to reiterate the kinds of barriers, attitudinal, institutional, systemic, that persons with disabilities face. And also the importance of viewing disability not as a monolithic category. Because, when we tend to flatten out the category and speak of disability, in a very sort of one-size-fits-all way, we lose to a great extent the complexity and the nuance. So when we talk about disabilities, I think the one constituency in the disability sector that is the most marginalized of the marginalized is the intellectual and developmental disabilities sector. Because as I remember Michael Berube very famously said, you don't have a lot of persons with intellectual disabilities holding professor positions in universities. So the whole issue of power, once again, that has been flagged by the previous speakers, while persons with disabilities really don't find themselves having very much power within the educational system, persons with developmental disabilities, with neurodiversities, in fact, find themselves in an even more powerless situation because of the kind of exclusion that they face. So just to clarify, the term neurodiversity really was coined by an Australian sociologist, Judy Singer, in the 1990s. And she used it really to refer to persons with autism from a social justice perspective, looking at their disabilities not just as a site of stigma or as a site of deficiency, but rather as a difference in human capacities, a difference in the way that the human brain works. And although the term has largely been used in the context of autism spectrum conditions, it also now includes categories like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, special learning disabilities, and so on. Conditions which were really not spoken very much about in disability studies for a very long time. And to just insert a personal note here, I came into the area because I'm a parent. I'm a parent of a young adult now who's with autism. And when I wanted to do research or get back into doing a PhD, I thought disability was a good place where I could really sort of do something which was not done before. But whatever I read about it, and we're talking here about the early 2000s, was basically in the fields of psychology, special education, rehabilitation science, and so on. There was hardly any sociological literature that I could lay my hands on. And probably that was what kind of made me to look at, autism and the family as a site for research. Because the whole sort of my research question was, what do families do, or how do families reorient themselves when there is an individual in the family who's got a condition which by its very definition impacts social, communicative, and language abilities. That is, the whole notion of sociality, as we understand it, is challenged. And therefore, how do families really mobilize their cultural, social, and personal resources in order to make sense of this kind of a condition? So unlike other conditions where there may be a deficiency in seeing, or there may be a problem in hearing, there may be impairments in various sensorial or physical capacities, this kind of so-called deficit in sociality is something which makes the condition, to my mind, basically extremely sociologically interesting and challenging. So that also led me into explorations of what cross-culturally is considered as competent personhood. Across cultures, how do we really, frame the person? I think the first paper that Professor Mehrotra and I wrote together was constructing, was looking at intellectual disabilities, how they're constructed in a rural as well as in urban context. And I think things that we found out were very, very interesting in the way that intellectual disability or conditions like autism really are resonant, or really have a kind of a significance in contexts where universal education is very important, where white-collar work is important. So basically, the connection between the so-called deficits that an autistic person would have and the whole universe of education is something very, very interesting, and which I found extremely interesting. I'd also like to complicate this idea of inclusion, and I bring my own experience into this discussion. So as a very young child, my son with autism was extremely hyperactive. It was very difficult to contain him in one place. He was liable to dash off anywhere, and therefore his safety it was something which was a matter of great concern. So for me, inclusion did not really just mean getting him admitted into a regular school where he would probably dash off, and there would be no way of ever knowing where he had gone and where he could possibly come to harm. So I think when we speak about inclusion, I think we really need to look at what the individual really needs at a particular stage of their development, and how whatever educational opportunities are made available to them at that point of time really help them to grow, help them to develop, help them to optimize their capacities and their potentials. So particularly for conditions like autism and learning and intellectual disabilities, I think the notion of inclusion really does need to be problematized, because in many cases you would have a situation of, in the name of inclusion, a child just being sat down in a regular class, and really no kind of tailored transaction, no kind of curricular adjustments, or any kind of actual teaching taking place, because the teachers are just not trained. And therefore, this also leads to situations where children who are compliant, the term that is often used is, ye baithta nahi hai, he doesn't sit, he or she doesn't sit. So sitting is considered a very, very important attribute for a student within the Indian educational system. So jo bacha baithta nahi hai, child who cannot be contained in one physical place and who's not giving you their undivided attention or switching off, but is still, rooted to that place, is therefore a candidate who is unsuitable for inclusion. So often what tends to happen is that the very uneven, abilities that persons with autism typically have. A person who may not be sitting, but who may have great aptitude for academic, work, would then be left out of the classroom or would not be included in the classroom because he or she does not sit. So, I think there needs to be a much more complex understanding of various conditions. It's a tall order, of course. We cannot expect all our teachers to be well trained in, the characteristics of each and every condition, what kind of inputs each and every condition needs. We now have 21 disabilities on the list, but so many other disabilities which are really not included in the notified disabilities as yet. So I think inclusion, therefore, is a very, very complex idea, a very complex concept. But I think what the heart of inclusion really, boils down to acceptance and to respect for persons who are different. So disability as a diversity, when it is seen as a diversity and not as a deviance, I think that really is the starting point from where, inclusive pedagogy can, actually emerge. All too often, as a parent, I've seen it all too often. Teachers, overburdened teachers within our government system who are not just teaching, but who are doing multifarious other tasks, including drawing up lists for elections, cooking up midday meals, and so on. So our horrendously overburdened public education system, particularly at the school level, to expect this kind of level of, work in order to include students of all kinds of different abilities and disabilities in the classroom. This is indeed a tall order. So I think in terms of systemic changes, the change really would begin at the kind of level of respect we give our school teachers, the kind of training we give our school teachers, the way we empower our teachers, because they are the frontline workers in every sense of the term. And in the context of autism and similar conditions, it is frequently seen that, when a child is in a school at the primary stages, there may be a good deal of inclusion, because to deal with a child at the primary level, teachers do get a lot of training in how to deal with primary school students. The issues really start happening at the secondary level, when peer interactions become more complex, when issues like puberty, maturity, sexuality, all these issues come into the picture. That is when a lot of teachers and parents find themselves completely at a loss as to how to address these challenges. So that is also one of the reasons why at the secondary level, a lot of children who were doing very well in the primary level tend to, start losing their grades, tend to fail in exams, and may eventually drop out or be withdrawn from the school system altogether. And once they're out of the school system, obviously the likelihood of them getting to higher education system is also ruled out. And I recently read the AISHE figures of students with disabilities in higher education for the period 2017-18 to 21-22. I think it was just 0.2. I stand to be corrected. It was abysmal, the level of admission of students with disabilities in higher education. So the problems or the issues and challenges that exist in higher education for learners with disabilities, I think, has been very well brought out by Nandini. In the school system, there is still some kind of training for teachers on how to, teach children with what are called special educational needs. In higher education, there is absolutely no such training that I'm aware of. So many teachers in higher education are actually dealing with learners with disabilities or students with disabilities for the first time in their lives, and are often, with the best of intentions, really not able to address their challenges. So coming back to neurodiversity, those students with neurodiverse conditions or autism or learning disabilities who actually make it to the higher education system tend to be those students who are, and this word is frequently used, although I really, I don't like it at all, and I think even persons with disabilities don't, high functioning individuals with disabilities. So this term high functioning is also a huge misnomer. There are individuals on the autism spectrum who may be extremely verbal, who may be able to write, who may be able to do many of the things that you expect students at the higher education level to do. Yet, because of their social difficulties, they suffer so much psychological stress and pressure that mental health issues and challenges are very, very common. A particular issue of importance is that of gender in autism. So we find that a lot more men, or a lot more boys are diagnosed with autism. But the reason for this we now are beginning to understand is that girls tend to mask their difficulties much better than boys because of the way gender training or gender socialization happens. So the issues of young girls and women with conditions like autism, who may often be misdiagnosed as having mental health issues or having mental illness, is also something that has been observed a good deal all over the world. So what I'd also like to come to very quickly, and this question, I think it's very interesting that it has been pointed out. the role of technology, the fact that engineering departments, architecture departments, the sciences are actually, the applied sciences are actually working a lot in the field of disability in terms of assistive technology, universal design for learning, which, these are terminologies that all of us are familiar with. To what extent are they actualized in the classroom? And I think technology, the way technology is, advancing, artificial intelligence, the kinds of digital tools that we have, these really make it a very, very exciting time for persons, with neurodiversity, who have been using the kind of social interaction, the kind of community building that has been happening through the internet amongst neurodiverse persons is something that really kicked off with the internet revolution. So you have a lot more persons with neurodiversity globally who are interacting with each other, sharing their perspectives, who are able to communicate with each other in a space which is not threatening like a face-to-face communication is for many individuals with autism and similar disabilities, who may find an actual social situation very difficult because of its unpredictability. So in a sense, the algorithm-driven, predictable kind of a format of an online interaction tends to be much more amenable for them in terms of the way they perceive the world and the way in which they interact in the world. And this, I think, is a huge opportunity for pedagogy. This is a huge opportunity for what we actually, how we actually open up classrooms for persons with neurodiversity. Because the classroom need not necessarily just be a physical space. The virtual classroom, with all its problems, I know that as sociologists, we have grappled with the issues of, virtual teaching, the kind of crisis that COVID-induced, online education brought about. But nevertheless, there are huge prospective opportunities in it. For instance, just to give an example, when it comes to, comes to absorption in the workplace, a lot of persons with autism who may have had great difficulty in going for physical interviews and facing an interview panel find it probably much easier to have online interviews where their abilities rather than their deficits are called into question. So I think technology, the digital space, AI, all these present enormous opportunities, which we as teachers really, I think, fall far behind in terms of, really trying to understand and grapple with. And there is a huge need for us to grapple with these new technologies. Not new, these technologies have been there for a while, but for us, they may seem very new. And to conclude, I'd like to come back to the whole issue of curriculum. So as Professor Nilika rightly said, it is difficult to really launch programs and courses in disability studies, given the kind of academic load that most universities have. A good way to do it would be to seed disability in all your conventional disciplines. So in the teaching of history, the history of medicine is a fascinating area in which disability comes across as a very powerful theme. For instance, if we look at the way in which the medical system evolved in the West, the medical system evolved in colonial India, the way facilities for persons with leprosy, which was one of the huge disabilities in the medieval world. So I think these are very, very interesting forays into disability through our conventional disciplines. Sociology, of course, has huge potential for really exploring disability, which I wish it had done in a more full way. So when we talk about axes of exclusion like caste, class, and gender, disability, unfortunately, is always missing from the discourse, and it has to be forcibly almost, brought into attention. Where is the disability angle? In literature and culture studies, it is very exciting to see the kind of work that is going on in English literature and the way in which texts, cinema, etc., are being looked at from a disability lens. Very, very interesting and exciting work coming out in that regard. So I think all the so-called conventional disciplines need to be re-looked at or need to bring in a disability angle. So from a pedagogical perspective, looking at disability as one of the very, very crucial human experiences, which permeates all aspects of life and permeates every discipline, whether in an overt way or a not explicitly stated way. really is crucial. And to briefly conclude, I'd just like to say that without this kind of lens, without this kind of way of looking at disability, we all need to remember, the famous phrase that we are all temporarily able-bodied. So disability as a category is something that impacts each and every one of us. It is not something that happens to somebody else, or it's not something that happens to somebody else's child. It is something that is going to happen to each and every one of us as, life expectancy has increased. Are going to have experience in our lifetime various kinds of disabilities. Disabilities related with aging, of course, are all around us, and I'm sure many of you must actually be actually grappling with these disabilities in your families or in your immediate circles. So I think I'll just stop, because it would be good to open it up for discussion. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Shubhangi, for underlining so many different aspects in your talk, and especially about neurodiversity, which is really not talked about much. With my little familiarity with the US system, also I realized that it is intellectually disabled and those with psychosocial disabilities that are always left behind. So our systems are even more, I think, exclusive of the students from these sections. So I think we have been talking about diversity, disability as diversity. And Nandini also pointed to the power dynamics. But I think when we are talking about disability affirming pedagogies, we should also speak about how there are also hierarchies of disabilities in all fields of life. So there are certain disabilities that are more visible and that are more talked about, and the activists are also more vocal about their demands and requirements, whereas those with the intellectual disabilities as well as psychosocial disabilities are we find through researches also that their voices are marginal in the higher education settings. We are also finding that in recent years, young people, especially post COVID, young people are complaining a lot about mental health issues. And these psychosocial disabilities are something that institutionally and also in terms of teachers one-to-one interaction with students is something that needs to be taken care of. So recently in our university there was I think all the universities must have got these surveys by the government of India on their they are really worried about the growing number of suicides. And so mental health is a very, very important issue which has to be discussed in the ambit of disability studies perspective. So with this, I think briefly, I know we are running out of time, but how much time do we have, Leena, for discussion? At least 15-20 minutes we should give to the
Certainly.
participants. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
20,
So,
25 minutes.
yeah, I open the session to all the participants here. Kindly raise your hand or write down your question in the chat box. So, I got a direct question from Dr. Nisar from Pakistan, and he's talking about what measure were taken or are being taken, especially in teaching the persons with disabilities. And also, he says that don't you think it will be at the cost of normal students? So I think that is what we are really challenging. Who are these normal students? And when we are talking about institutional support, we are talking about teaching revising our teaching pedagogies, we are talking about adopting universal designs, we are talking of diversity of students. So we don't want to leave anybody behind, and legally also it is mandated on us that persons with disabilities are included in the, though Tony may not like this instrumentality, but nevertheless, it is very important that persons of all kinds of disabilities and are included in the education system. I have one of my colleague Ritika sitting here, who's done a wonderful study on deaf people, and she talks about how there is such a high dropout rate of students who are deaf at the school level itself. So they are not able to reach the higher education settings. We don't find many deaf people in the higher education settings. So, uh, like, it is very important that every student should have some access to higher education. So I think this is where our concern should be in institutional terms, in terms of empathy, in terms of policies, as well as practices. So yes, are there other questions?
There is a question in the chat box about some good books for disability to learn more about disability.
So
Anyone?
I'll leave it to the panel here, please. So Shubhangi, Nandini, if you could give some references.
There's, I think, one question, Pavani.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of books which are there available in India at the moment on disability studies. You should see the volume by Anita Ghai, which is Disability in South Asia. You should see the book by Renu Adlakha, which is Disability Studies in India. So these are very seminal works on India, and they cover a range of diverse topics. I think Nilika also you have a edited volume, right? So there are
No, I
these
don't.
books.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are these books that you can read on disability studies in India. And through these books, you can reference out onto the global literature that is there. So there is a lot of literature on disability in the global south. You can look at work by Pushpa Parekh, by Sean
John
Gretsch.
Gregg.
Yeah, so these kind of literature you can look. And then there is the core of disability studies from which we have all drawn on, which was the models literature. But later on, it is the theorizing that was done by Mike Oliver, Tom Shakespeare, Leonard Davis. So those kind of Western literature from which we have drawn on, but then Indian or the South Asian disability studies has expanded much beyond that.
Yeah. Yes, Pavani, can
Yeah,
you?
ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, thank you for the panel for such an enlightening session on disability and diversity. It was such an interesting talk. And then my questions are like, Marutra ma'am, you said like UGC establishing disability studies in university, and JNU is highly, rich in disability activism. On the other hand, like all the universities are not equally competing with JNU. For instance, I'm from University of Hyderabad. We hardly have disability activism on campus. But then the campus is sensitized and professors are also very sensitized. I would like to say like everything looks so flowery on the paper, but coming to the implementation part, where are we lacking?
Uh, yeah. So Nandini, would you like to take this question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In addition to this, ma'am, can tell some more, ma'am? In addition to this,
Yeah.
Nandini ma'am said about power dynamics at university because they are all treated as oppressed communities and their voices are not heard. But not only in university, but what about the family dimension over there, ma'am? For instance, few of my respondents have told me because I'm doing on disability identity and assistive technology, a sociological study of orthotics and prosthetics. So I'm also working on inclusive technologies as my postdoc topic. So whenever I'm interviewing these respondents keep telling me like, starting with the notion of family. So where are our voices are really heard? Where do we belong? Do we belong to the hearts of the? Neither we belong to the hearts of the cities, not to the people. So this is one interesting dilemma which I got it, because family as an agency at one or the other point, it starts comparing others. I mean, like they are slow learners, and I mean, everything looks so easy on paper. Like disabled
Yeah,
people have
Pavani, we
reservations.
got your point. I think
Yes, sir.
Nandini can take up the first question, and the Shubhangi can take the second question on family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am.
Thank you, Pavni, for your
Yeah, ma'am.
question. I think, uh, uh, see, on campus, activism needs to be taken up by the students themselves. So, if they
Yeah.
start flagging the issues, if they start questioning the way in which systems are organized, and they get organized themselves. So, if you can have a disabled students forum on campus itself, it will be easier to address some of the issues. I'm not saying you can address all the issues, because there has to be a response from the other side also. But some of the issues can be put on the table, and then people will start thinking. Because if you don't bring out the issues, people are not, people who have no experience of disability or the diversity of disability as such, they will not be able to even understand what is the issue. So I think the best thing is to get united and speak unitedly, as a students forum, no, so that individual students may not be victimized in any way. But before Shubhangi goes on with the family, I just want to add one question. I want to add one comment here about the family. In sociology, we have read about the family so much. The family being the organizing unit, the family being the unit for care and support, for socialization. So, what we need to realize is the family is at once the site of care and protection, but it can also be the site of oppression in diverse ways. So, what
Yeah.
you are seeing here is
Yes.
a sign of oppression sometimes, but couched in the language of care. And I think
Yes.
Shubhangi would speak
Yes.
much better about
It's
this.
Yes.
nothing really more to add to that. I mean, I think you've summed it up beautifully. But, Pavni, it's very important to remember that when we are studying disability in a South Asian context, particularly, there is no getting away from family. Because,
Yes.
in the West, for instance, the role that the state has taken in terms of systems of care, right? There is no such social security net in the Indian context. It is the family that is looking after the person with disability from womb to tomb, as it were.
Mm.
And I think it's important also to look at the family in a much more nuanced way. Because when we speak,
Yes.
when we have sociology, the very real impact that the disability of a child has on families that are poor, families that have no access to medical, any other kinds of resources. So that is something that it is a major issue. It needs to be looked at much more empathetically. And here I would also add that much of our understanding about disability, which we have borrowed from the West, which is a very individual-centered kind of a perspective, right? So even welfare, even entitlements are at the level of the individual. Whereas, in fact, it is the family as a unit that really needs to be strengthened and empowered. Look at situations of mental health challenges, for instance. Read any of the literature on schizophrenia and the family. Look at the kind of family burden that is there in the case of individuals with very very severe psychosocial disabilities. So I think we need to. There's no getting away from it. There's just a way of looking at it in a much more nuanced way, as well as then also thinking in terms of familial empowerment. How do you empower families to also understand, to effect changes in attitudes, to empower in terms of financial, social, material, psychological resources. So all these are things that really need to be looked at, particularly in the perspective of long-term care. I hope that answers.
Ma'am,
Okay.
in addition, ma'am, one more thing. In addition to your point, as you have pointed out, that 21 disability categories have to be included in the category segregation, right? But then, as of now, we have disabled categories have segregated. So, like while applying for the jobs, I mean, persons with disabilities are really facing problems with the segregations. Once, if we don't have that segregated category and it is not properly defined, we are directly put into the general category. So people, the society per se, they say like for disabled everything is easy, but then on the other hand, they don't understand that we are competing on par with general category. So how to look about this issue or how to take forward this issue, ma'am? This is like a problem for most of the current disability students are facing, like those who are enrolled in disability studies.
Pavani,
Yeah.
we got your point. Tony, would you like to take up this question?
Yeah, so right, thank you, Professor Nilika. So before that, let me just address a little bit on the question of political activism. And it's absolutely right what Professor Nilika pointed out, that there is a hierarchy in the disability movement, thinking about disability and all of that, right? One of the things that I believe that campuses should do, and students definitely, is to think, students with disabilities, to think very critically about the identity called disability, right? In the sense that there needs to be a conscious movement towards thinking about disability as an identity in itself. This is not something that I have seen many Indian campuses have, and also holding existing political circles, whatever is available on campus, accountable to accepting disability as an identity on which politics need to be. There needs to be political praxis, sort of a thing, right? So very few campuses have successfully done it. In most campuses, the questions of disability identity get drowned in other kind of thing. Even when it is raised, it's raised in a hierarchical fashion that the needs of blind is more important than the needs of some other disability, and it's kind of, that's a fashion in which it's mostly done. So there needs to be a more conscious thought that we need to put about what it means to have occupy the identity of a student with disability on Indian campuses today. The job market question is a very important and interesting question. So we have some legal interventions happening at this moment because we have pointed to the government that some of the notifications that have come are erroneous in its nature. For example, they would ask that there will be a vacancy for a chemistry professor who is visually blind. And I'm like, thank you, but will any department in India give PhD admission for a blind person in the chemistry lab, right? And you will find many erroneous sort of things like so. This question on one hand needs to be challenged legally on the rostering side of it. But I think on the other hand, one also needs to make this at the center of general disability rights sort of an activism, if one could say so, in the sense that we need to really challenge this idea that if you don't find what they call as the qualified people, or what's the particular term they use, they would just leave that vacancy as such. So we need to challenge this at an activism level also, but more importantly, there has been some legal interventions which are happening specifically on the academic job market. We are seeing that a lot of vacancies are left vacant because of the erroneous manner in which rostering is done. And there has been some challenges to that of late, at least when it comes to central universities. We have not been able to gauge the scene at the state university level. But there needs to be a lot of work done on that, because the rostering after the RPWD Act 2016, the rostering has got much more complicated and complex. So we also need to put much more effort in discerning what's happening on that front. And I can see what the point being raised here. Thank you.
Just a minute. There is a question by Mansi Power who wants to know how we can contextualize the teaching content to be culturally adapted to the realities of Indian school classrooms. Are there any frameworks which researchers like her can consider? So anybody would like to take this question?
I think she's added that she does dyslexia research at BITS Pilani.
Yeah, I mean, I am not aware of any existing framework that talks about how teaching content can be culturally adapted. I think, Mansi, you can look at good practices which may be there across the country. So if you speak to the dyslexia associations that might be there, you might find some good practices. But other than that, one suggestion I would have for you is to also seek legal intervention because, like for deaf students in schools, there is a single language declaration. So that means for deaf students, they will study all their subjects in the same language. So it may be English or it may be the vernacular, but all the subjects, and they don't have to study a second language or a third language because of the limitations that deaf people face in terms of learning, acquiring language. So similarly, can we have some kind of legal provisions put in for dyslexic students where we say that this much content should be made available or their evaluation will be only on this much content. So I don't know, I mean that is something that the experts can guide you on, but maybe this kind of a legal parameter needs to come in, not subjecting dyslexic students to say the entire curriculum that is there.
I was also thinking that, when you are talking about cultural models here, you have to bring in intersectionality and say, for instance, a lot of discussion on tribal education also speaks about importance of language. So language is extremely important, and many a times dyslexic children find it very difficult to read in another language, but they are little comfortable in their own vernacular language. So there are certain, other experiments that are happening in other educational practices, and you need not just, be looking for solutions in disability studies. You have to, align your research with what are the kind of debates that are going on in terms of cultural, adaptations in the school classrooms in India. So that is one. The other question, there is a question on, can you see, Nandini, I think you could also take up this question, but I'll just go, this is on multiple marginalization. So yes, intersectionality is very important, and legal scholars are looking at intersectionality now, which even the RPD Act does not really address uh, importantly. So I think the question of, say, ethnicity and sexuality, caste especially, caste is something that most of the legal provisions do not like to consider. So that is one major gray area, but Nandini could speak more on that. Yeah.
Yes, so I have seen this accessibility guidelines and standards, but the point is that there is no mandatory compliance provisions that are put in, then this is what universities are using to kind of escape. Now having said that, I also would like to flag the issue is that universities start responding to such issues only when they have students with disabilities, so particular disabilities. So once you have a blind student, you develop some kind of, or you devise a system for blind students, and it's still now the blind and the locomotor disability students that we largely see in the higher education premises. Some deaf students have come in, but other disabilities are so invisible, and often there is no declaration that yes, I have a dyslexic problem or something like that. And that I think is something that, sets the entire system back. So claiming a disability identity until we can make it a matter of right, until we can make it also a matter of pride, we will always continue to see this kind of multiple marginalization, because disabled people are socialized from childhood in all spaces as people who are, in need of care protection, who are incapable, etc. So only when the disability identity becomes an identity of pride can we probably see more claims being made on university spaces to make them more accessible.
Yeah.
Can I just add a point here?
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah. So I think speaking of disability identity and so on is extremely important. But I think what is also interesting to see is the kind of control the medical system has over certification, identification, and so on, which is also a huge issue, particularly for the invisible disabilities. So even though in terms of disability studies, we speak of a shift from the medical to the social model and so on, nevertheless, the stranglehold of the medical profession is getting probably even more intense from the perspective of administratively certifying people as having a disability. So the whole thing of certification and medicalization is also a very, very important thing we need to consider.
There is another question by Ritika Srivastav. She writes, when schools run for so much uniformity in terms of curriculum and training and systemic erasure of disability, where and how does this preparedness for diversity and disability comes until we inhabit their world? Yeah. So yeah.
Ma'am, I was your student in JNU, and when you're talking about in same Pragya's batch, and when you're talking about Pragya, I also remember Abhay. And one incident that struck me
Yes.
was when we were climbing down the CSSS stairs, and I was telling that Abhay, there's a stair there next, then there's a stair next. He told me, Ritika, don't tell.
Huh.
And so that kind of preparedness never came until he disrupted or he
Yes.
mentioned. So while Pragya was quite vocal about her rights and the kind of infrastructure in not being available, whereas there were people like Kurukshetra or Abhay who were quite not happy about talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anybody would like to take up a question? Tony, would you like to take it up?
I think it's important to, like she's spoken about disruption, I think disability as something which is profoundly disruptive of our certainties, of our certitudes, of our belief in our, abilities to negotiate the world. That is probably why it is something that people so fear, why there is so much, reaction, or there's such a negation of disability as a lived experience. Which is why it just beats me that when you have, as per the World Health Organization, 1.3 billion, persons with disabilities, how is it still such a marginal issue in academia?
Yes.
It's a baffling, really question.
Yeah, Professor Mishra has talked about. Professor Mishra, would you like to come in here? If you are still here.
I think Tony wanted to say something, Nilika.
Yeah, please, Tony. Go ahead.
Nothing very insightful or anything, but the fact that so this is again my life as a person with disability. I have figured out that people who have prior exposure at their school age with some or other forms of disability tend to be people who are more open towards this sort of disruption, and that makes our life easy, that we don't feel like we are actually disrupting someone's thought ideas, right? And it's absolutely true that the fact that even today we think about schooling for disabled people with disability as separated from schooling for people without disability, that separation really makes a lot of challenges for someone entering into the higher education system as a person with disability, because you are everyone around you, almost everyone around you maybe meeting someone with disability for the first time in their work or learning spaces, right? Um, and you as a person with disability feel very like sort of timid about that. And even for you as a person with disability, if you come from a school in which you have only met other students with disability, your peer group has been entirely students with disability. Again, when you enter a university space, you suddenly feel tremors inside you. What's happening? And that is true. That school systems makes people very, very rigid, and it's very difficult to then come out and say that I'm here as a person with disability, and that kind of, yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean,
Yeah, even Tony, I would like to add that even as people who or students who are meeting the students with disability, this becomes something very new because these spaces have never been shared before. Schoolings have been separate. There are special schools for especially neurodiverse students and students with disability. So it becomes a very new space and a very new, so that preparedness is never being learned or maybe given.
So there is a question by Sanchana. Sanchana, um, speak? Sanchana?
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah,
Uh,
please.
ma'am, so my first question was basically we were talking about how in the earlier frame of education, especially in schooling, how much it is important for students to be sensitized about students with disability when there are even not much students with disability in the classroom. So how much it is important, or how the curriculum for teachers who are getting trained to teach students, how much it is, how can the curriculum be more inclusive, or how it can practice affirmative disability pedagogy?
One of the things that I would like to put in here before one of the panelists can take up this question is that special education, for instance, or B.Ed courses, you did not really engage with critical disability perspectives for a very long time. Education departments are slowly waking up to the fact that disability perspective has to percolate down, because much of the special education was medically oriented. So the social model of disability is something that they have to wake up to. The second thing is also about this ableism that you talk about. Ableism is not only in ableism is all pervasive. Ableism is this binary between us and them has to go. So ableism has to be questioned, it has to be called out, it has to be, we have been talking about how raising your voice against ableism at every point is so important. um, I think, Tony, would you like to come in here about this question by Sanchana?
I'm sorry, I lost the audio for a bit.
Okay, Sanchana, can you come in here again?
I'm really sorry for this.
Yes, ma'am, sure, ma'am. So my question was, how could be the curriculum that trained teachers can be affirmative related to the disability pedagogy?
No, I mean, like Professor Nilika just said, I mean, the fact that disability is something that needs to be touched upon while training teachers in quote unquote mainstream affairs is something that is still not set in. So the idea is that if you want to teach persons with disability, then you do special education. Even there, I mean, of course, it's highly medicalized and all of that. And teachers who are supposed to teach, everyone is not supposed to know anything about kind of disability or disability associated. My understanding is that there has been again some recent conversations around modules for what they call as ITEP these days, Integrated Teacher Education Program. I think that's what they are called. And I think there has been some recent conversations around this, and hopefully something productive would come out.
Okay, Ankana, you have a question? Ankana? Sorry?
I think she has network issues. Do you want me to read out the question, Nilika?
She
She says, ma'am, there have been some barriers on examination system in schools and colleges without writer, as writing is the only method. Even the students in many cases can't attend for lack of writer. Should we have any alternative method to evaluate the students as persons with disabilities in higher education?
I'm all for it, Ankana. I would like blind people to write their papers in Braille and for examiners to get those transcribed and mark them, because we have now Braille readers also. So if we want, we can change the systems in many ways, but we are still following a one frame fits all kind of a program. So we could also devise other evaluation mechanisms. Here we have talked about a writer for, say, persons with cerebral palsy, persons with blindness, but you could have other methods of evaluation for, say, students who are having invisible disabilities, for students on the autism spectrum. So there could be different ways of evaluating rather than one set standard method of evaluation.
I think,
Nil-
it's
Nil-
also, yeah, Tony, please go ahead.
No, I just want to call the attention of the gathering to the fact that a month ago, Department of Persons with Disability has come out with progressive guidelines on what is called as scribes. So now there is much more emphasis on using technology for visually blind and other print impaired people in exam, and there is a vibrant conversation as of now happening, some kind of public consultation. Some of us are offering our views on this, but this is happening. This conversation around using technology for visually blind individuals, that conversation is definitely happening. On the other hand, definitely there should be a conversation about alternate evaluations. And as I teach these days, I realize that how different evaluations would give different grades to the same student. And at times these are compounded with due to disabilities, and that conversation, I'm not aware about anything at a nationalized level, but hopefully at least in university level we have some kind of conversation. But the Department of Persons with Disability intervention is quite an interesting and progressive one, I should say.
Yeah. So, Professor Mishra, you had actually, you would like to come in here.
I'm a learner because I don't deal with disability studies, though in my family, I deal with such a person. In fact, for me, a very important issue, maybe a theoretical concern, maybe inclusion versus segregation. And therefore, my observation was this, that I mean, school education as such, they represent inclusion, process of inclusion in our society. I mean, in modern society. But we deal with these so-called disabled people in a very special educational setting. So how this inclusion versus segregation becomes important. Therefore, I appreciate that point that AI may be helpful in intervening this process. Therefore, that observation which I liked, only that very brief observation. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to educate myself about all these aspects of disability in higher education. Thank you.
Shubhangi, would you like to come in here on the question of AI?
Actually, thank you so much for that question, sir. It's really interesting that most of the innovations which we take so much for granted, for instance, the SMS or, the audio facility in your smartphone, most of these were tailored, keeping persons with the requirements of persons with disabilities in mind. Even the invention of the telephone, for instance, was basically to facilitate people who had various kinds of disabilities. So I mean, AI is a very sort of exciting as well as a terrifying area for me. I mean, when I look at it, the things it can do and the things it can really undo are quite scary. But my argument basically is that as social scientists, we need to engage with it far more than I feel we have currently done. And as scholars of disability, I think it's all the more important because technology can be such an enabler as well as such a divider in that sense. Yeah. So while on the one hand we speak of the digital divide and so on and so forth, and marginalized communities are experiencing digital divide far more than people with socioeconomic capital, I think the opportunities that the digital space provides, because it is cheap. It's not so many of these technologies are very, very cheap and very replicable and very accessible also. I mean, did you ever think that in our lifetime we would see the kind of mobile phone spread that we see today? I mean, everybody, right from the doodh wala to the sabji wala, is probably more tech savvy than many of us. So I think given this kind of democratization of tech, it's something we really need to engage with, particularly in terms of how it can make the lives of persons with disabilities easier, how it can make their access to public goods more accessible, whether through educational technology, financial technology, and so on and so forth. But of course, with dozens of caveats, in terms of misuse, in terms of creating a new kind of exploitation, and so on and so forth.
I can see we have already reached 8 o'clock. So so I think this conversation will go on. But I'm so glad that it has evoked so many responses from the audience, and it has been a great conversation, I felt. So thank you to the panelists and to Leena for organizing it, and of course the participants who so enthusiastically participated in the discussion.
So thank you so much. Before I will invite one of the members of the RC to deliver a vote of thanks. But before I do that, I really have to thank each one of you because you've foregrounded some very important aspects in this entire disability, in the discourse on disability. And Tony, I totally agree with you on this. And I think even Nandini spoke about it. And Shubhangi, the idea of inclusion, how it needs to be problematized, and this tokenism. Tokenism is actually something that one really has to think about. It is a fact that because I come from a state university, very often it becomes a box ticking exercise, right? And, institutional mechanisms. So, for example, UGC directives on accessibility and stuff like that. Sometimes I feel they are couched in a language which can be which are quite problematic, but in some ways it also acts as a pressure on the institutions to kind of to adhere to it. So even if you and then it becomes a kind of, very often it's perceived as a burden. So for example, students with learning disabilities who get extra half an hour to write their exams, there was this very, very disheartening, but there was this incident where someone said that okay, it becomes a matter of punishment for a teacher who goes to invigilate there because it's extra time. These are the things that I think we need to seriously engage with. And thank you so much for bringing it all out. And yes, Aishna, can I invite you to? Yes, it's been a long day. Yeah.
Everyone, it is indeed my honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks. On behalf of ADHOC RC1, Pedagogy, Teaching and Learning of Indian Sociological Society, at the outset, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to the President of Indian Sociological Society, Professor Maitrey Chaudhary, for her inspiring presence and for initiating these online, series in the RCs. I extend my deep appreciation to our respected chair for the session, Professor Nilika Mehrotra,
for steering the session so well, setting the right tone, and her thorough engagement in the field of disability studies. Special thanks to our esteemed panelists, Dr. Nandini Ghosh, Dr. Tony Kurian, and Dr. Shubhangi Vaidya. It was indeed a very rich and enriching experience to be part of this session. Thank you, members of our RC and participants, for attending this session and engaging in the discussions. And lastly, I would like to thank our RC convener, Professor Leena Pujari, and co-convenor, Dr. Roopa Rathnam, for engaging so passionately with the spirit of pedagogy, teaching, and learning. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
Lovely.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.